Hey everybody, what's up? Trey Wingo here. Welcome into another edition of Straight Facts Homie, the podcast where we use data to analyze what's going on and have great conversations with people in the know about the things you want to know in sports. We got a lot to get to on this episode, including the idea that just maybe, there should be someone else than a quarterback considered for the MVP. So let's get into that right now. The best team in football is the only one-loss team in football, and that's the Indianapolis Colts. They do it again on Sunday. Granted, I get it. It was against the Tennessee Titans, and the Tennessee Titans have a myriad of issues. But they did what you're supposed to do to a bad team. Beat the crap out of them. I always find it funny when people say, well, yeah, who have they played? They've played their schedule, right? And then they say, well, they've only played soft teams. Okay, well, what do you want a good team to do against a soft team? You want them to beat the crap out of them, which is exactly what they did. But this is not as much about the Indianapolis Colts as it is about how we think about the MVP in the NFL. Because you can make a very, very compelling statistical argument that while we all have talked, including this podcast, about Daniel Jones and the great things he's done for the Indianapolis Colts, he's not even the best player on their team and may not be the best player on the offensive side of the ball for the Colts. In fact, you could make a very compelling argument based on statistics that Jonathan Taylor is not only the MVP of the Indianapolis Colts, but he should be the MVP of the league. But here's how skewed we are in this day and age towards the quarterback. I just went and did a quick look on a lot of the betting odds on MVP at various different sites. And obviously right now it's the odds on favorite is Patrick Mahomes with what he's done. And the assumption there is he's going to have Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, Travis Kelce, and everybody at his disposal for the rest of the season. And you saw what happened when they got Rashee Rice back. Granted, it was against the Raiders, but that 31-0 score was the most lopsided score or the most lopsided game I've seen in recent memory. The Chiefs could do whatever they wanted in that game, right? Their first three touchdown drives were 92, 84, and 94 yards. And, they won. They were up 21-0 in the half, won 31-0. They didn't play. None of their players offensively, their stars, didn't play past the second drive of the third quarter. That's how dominant they were. I mean, they had 30 first downs. The Raiders only had 30 plays, second fewest plays by a team since the AFL-NFL merger in 1970. So that's how dominant it was. So that's why people are thinking, well, Patrick Mahomes has got this. But behind Patrick Mahomes, it's Josh Allen. And then it's Jared Goff or Baker Mayfield or Matthew Stafford. And then you get to Daniel Jones. And on one website, Daniel Jones is plus 2,000 to be the MVP. The same odds as Jonathan Taylor at plus 2,000. That doesn't make any sense at all, because if you look at what Jonathan Taylor has done, he scored 3 touchdowns in 3 straight games. They thought he had become the first ever with 3 rushing touchdowns in 3 straight games against the same opponents, but his last touchdown was the jet sweep. It's really a glorified handoff, but the ball does go forward, so it's ruled a pass. We've seen that with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs and a bunch of other teams a lot of times. Jonathan Taylor is absolutely dominating things. And you could make a statistical argument that Jonathan Taylor's dominance is higher than any other player at their position. And I know a lot of Buffalo fans are going to say, all right, but what about James Cook? Well, let's look at the numbers, okay? Because right now, Jonathan Taylor has played 8 games. He's rushed for 850 yards and is averaging 5.9 yards a carry. Now you look at James Cook. James Cook has played 7 games. He's got 753 yards. He's actually averaging 6 yards a carry, 1/10 of a yard more per game or per carry than Jonathan Taylor. And you say, well, Trey, wait a minute. If he's really on pace to have about the same number of yards, why are we looking at Jonathan Taylor differently? And it's very simple. It's because of the touchdowns. You look at the touchdowns for Jonathan Taylor this year. He has 12 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns, including one we had in the last game on that jet sweep. When you extrapolate that over a 17-game schedule, that's 25 and a half, which is impossible. So let's just say 26 or 25 rushing touchdowns and 4 receiving touchdowns. So that's looking at 30 total touchdowns, okay? Those are phenomenal numbers. Those are numbers that put you in a stratosphere where you have to be considered as the MVP. And oh, by the way, the last running back to get the MVP award in the NFL was Adrian Peterson in 2012 when he finished just a few yards shy of the single-season rushing record, still held by Eric Dickerson and that amazing season with the LA Rams back in the 80s. Now, if you look at James Cook and you extrapolate his stats through the entire season, again, long way to go, but he has 7 touchdowns through 7 games rushing and no receiving touchdowns. So if you look at the stats there and you take it one step further, okay, if you have 7 touchdowns in 7 games, that means he'd have 17 rushing touchdowns over a 17-game season. And that would be 8 or 9 less if we extrapolate this pace. And again, I understand sometimes these paces don't pick up for an entire season. But if we're doing the thing where we're talking about who should be in the MVP candidate based on how they've played now, we have to look at how they've played now. So let's assume that Jonathan Taylor's going to get, let's assume that James Cook is probably going to get 15 or 16 rushing touchdowns. And let's say he gets 2 or 3 receiving touchdowns through the end of the season. So we're looking at under 20 touchdowns, whereas Jonathan Taylor is on pace to be over 30 touchdowns total based on rushing and receiving in the pace he's on. That is a significant difference. And the other thing you have to factor into this, and it's true and it always has been, the better your team plays, the more likely you are to be considered the MVP. We talked about this last year, even though Josh Allen, even though Josh Allen got the MVP award, you go look at the numbers for Lamar Jackson, and you can go look at the numbers for Joe Burrow, who didn't make the playoffs. You could make the argument that their numbers were as good or better than Josh Allen's. Again, I'm not taking anything away from Josh Allen. I want to be clear. I'm just saying this thing is skewed on usually who is the best team with the best quarterback. Now, obviously, the Chiefs had the number 1 seed last year, and they were the number 1 seed, but it was a really off year for Mahomes in the offense. He didn't have a lot of his weapons, and they had to sort of manufacture ways, and they won their first 9 games in all kinds of crazy ways, right? So that sort of eliminated Mahomes. So it came down to Allen, Lamar, or Joe Burrow, and the Bengals didn't make the playoffs, and that obviously sunk Joe Burrow's argument for MVP. I disagree with that because they wouldn't have had a chance without Joe Burrow, but that's the way the mindset is. That's the way people think. So we have to do this in the way that people talk about it, in the way that the reality of how they think about it. So what we're trying to do here in this situation is change your reality and maybe, potentially, hopefully, change the way people think about it, because Jonathan Taylor has been far more dominant and far more important to the Indianapolis Colts than Daniel Jones has been. And again, we're not taking anything away from Daniel Jones. We've had him on the show. It's one of the best stories in the NFL this season. Cut loose, was on the practice squad for the Vikings last year, finally elevated to the regular season roster. Bet on himself. It's a 1-year, $14 million contract with Indianapolis, and the way he's playing, he's going to make north of $150 million in his next contract. It's a great story. But as my good friend Mark Schlereth likes to say, the actuator of that offense is without Jonathan Taylor. And if you have a guy putting up those kind of numbers on the team with the best record in the NFL, then that has to be the guy that is considered a front runner for the MVP. And I know what a lot of you are going to say right now, and I think it's a really interesting discussion, and that's why I want to bring it up, because I know the comments and people listening and watching are going to say, well, if that's the case, why didn't Saquon Barkley in a 2,000-yard season, why didn't he win the MVP? Now, this, again, is very interesting when you go back and look at the data, which I have in front of me right now. Last season, he only played 16 games. I understand that. He rushed for 2,005 yards. You know who was second on the rushing list last year? Derrick Henry, with 1,921 yards. I get it. He played all the games, and Saquon Barkley didn't. And for all the right reasons, because the Eagles won the Super Bowl, you can understand why Saquon didn't play that last game. And had he played the last game, he might have set the record, and then we look at it differently. But he didn't, and we can't. So we have to go by the numbers from last season. So Saquon had, 75 more yards, 80 more yards, basically, than Derrick Henry. But here's where it gets really interesting. Saquon Barkley averaged 5.8 yards per carry last year. Derrick Henry averaged 5.9. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Last season, on the ground, Saquon Barkley had 13 rushing touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 16 rushing touchdowns. So the gap, statistically, especially when it comes to the most important thing in football, scoring touchdowns, was significantly higher in favor of Derrick Henry than it was for Saquon Barkley, who had a chance to set the regular season record, but again, sat out for all the right reasons. So that's why I can look at the numbers right now, and based on what they're projected to be, and again, they could change. But the whole premise of this is people are talking about who's the front runner for the MVP right now. Right now, Jonathan Taylor is having a much more dominant season in the most important category, scoring touchdowns, than his closest rival, James Cook. And Cook had an unbelievable game against the Panthers on Sunday. And the Bills did what you're supposed to do to a bad team. They beat them out of their own stadium, okay? But your argument, or your discussion rather, because we don't argue on this show, we hopefully enlighten you with conversations about things that matter. If your opinion or your base point of what you think should happen is, well, if Saquon didn't get it last year, I don't see how Jonathan Taylor can get it this year. When you factor in that there was only an 80-yard rushing difference, and that Derrick Henry actually averaged more yards per carry, albeit slight, and he had significantly more touchdowns, then you see, well, okay, well, maybe it wasn't as dominant as people think. And again, now you go back to look at what Jonathan Taylor is doing behind one of the best offensive lines in football. I get that. He's on pace for over 30 total touchdowns, which would be right around a 10 touchdown difference than the second best rusher in James Cook. And again, we could have a situation toward the end of the season where the Colts, if they continue to win, will have things wrapped up, and maybe Jonathan Taylor doesn't play the last game of the regular season. Whereas you look at the Buffalo Bills, and they're going to have to probably play this thing out a little further because of how tight their race may be to get the number 2 seed or 3 seed, which is significant, okay? So that's all a future discussion. All we can go on is the data that we have in front of us. And if right now we're talking about Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Drake May and Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford as the MVP favorites, why are we not talking about the best player on the best team in football with more gravitas, with more weight? He's doing it. He's doing it week in and week out. Daniel Jones has been a godsend for the Colts, and he's been great, but he doesn't have to do everything. You know, the argument for Josh Allen last year was he did kind of have to do everything. He had to not only throw the ball, he had to run the ball for them to be effective. And that was a huge part of what we're seeing. But the way Jonathan Taylor has played, he's really the reason on the offensive side of the ball why the Colts are where they are. Daniel Jones has played great. He hasn't turned it over. He's made plays when they've needed him to make plays. My God, that throw to Alec Pierce late in that game against the Titans on Sunday was a thing of beauty, right? He comes through when he has to. But the guy that makes the offense go, the guy that makes the offense click, the guy that keeps them on schedule, and the guy that scores touchdowns, people, the guy that scores touchdowns is Jonathan Taylor. And Jonathan Taylor's argument is as strong as any of those quarterbacks for who should be the betting favorite for the MVP right now. And again, we're not crowning anybody after week 8. It doesn't happen that way. All I'm saying is there's a lot of talk about who should be the MVP of the league, and this guy is not getting talked about enough. And again, if you just go by statistics, and the most important statistic, as an offense, you want to score touchdowns. You don't want to kick field goals. In fact, you go look at that Ravens-Bears game, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The Bears lost that game because they were dominant on their first 2 drives and had to kick 2 field goals and couldn't punch it into the end zone when they got down there inside the 20-yard line. And that ends up being the difference in the game. You have to finish drives. You have to get there, and you have to finish the drive. And right now, in football, nobody is doing a better job of putting his team in position to score touchdowns and then scoring those touchdowns than Jonathan Taylor. It's been 13 years since we've had a running back win the MVP. And Adrian Peterson did it when he came close to setting the single-season rushing record, as we said, in 2012. Jonathan Taylor, in all likelihood, is not going to get as close as Adrian Peterson did to Eric Dickerson this year, but he's being dominant in a more important and beneficial way for this team. When you get to the goal line, cross the frickin' goal line, and he has done it. So it's probably going to go to a quarterback, and if the Chiefs and Mahomes continue to do what they're doing, it's probably going to be Patrick Mahomes. But if you don't think about Jonathan Taylor in a different way and understand the things that he's doing for that team and the things that he makes sure everyone else is able to do for that team, because when you run the ball, you can rest your defense. And when you run the ball that effectively, it opens up everything else in the offensive arsenal, because you've got to try and stop that guy in the box. And if you can't stop him, then you have to crash everything down, and that opens everything up on the outside for Pittman and Pierce and their great rookie tight end, Warren, out of Penn State. Daniel Jones is doing great things. But if you think that Daniel Jones should have the same betting odds on his own team as Jonathan Taylor for the MVP, you're not seeing the game correctly. Jonathan Taylor is the most dominant offensive player in football right now. And that award has routinely been the winner of the MVP. He deserves much higher consideration. And if this continues, there's no reason why he couldn't be the MVP when it's all said and done, the first running back to do it since Adrian Peterson in 2012. And those are straight facts, homie.